Thank you, Dr. Zakharova. The session that follows, ladies and gentlemen, will be in two parts. First, comment from our three distinguished guests, and then an opportunity for them to provide answers to questions that may emerge from the public audience. By way of starting everything off, the tapestry we have as a backdrop is the state of world order as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the principles that should drive the post-COVID-19 global order. We need to educate the future generation to plan and prepare, to think critically, to heed evidence-based advice, and to accept responsibilities as global citizens. There is a relevant New Zealand Māori saying that captures the challenge well. E kore tēnei whakaoranga huri kia tua o aku mokopuna, which means the generations of the future shall reap the awards of the seeds we have sown. Question 1, which I will pose to all panelists, goes as follows. What, in your view, should be different in the post-COVID 21st century world order? Do you think that the decision-making trends of restrictions on travel and movement and cooperation and sharing of research have been enough? And can I invite you first, Sir President José Ramos-Horta.
The post-COVID-19, whenever that may happen, as we know, the unpredictable nature of the virus we see in Germany right now, nationwide, a state of emergency, Austria, cases going up in the United States, in Europe, and eventually maybe in other parts of the world that have seen a slowdown. So it might be premature to talk about the post-COVID-19 because we don't know when this will happen. At the end of February 2020, the very beginning of the pandemic, I wrote a paper just for my colleagues in the Timorese leadership, where I refer to two pillars. One is the prevention pillar of COVID-19, which is obvious, mostly what we do. Everybody is doing around the world. Another is the economic recovery. And I was talking about a time frame of January 2020 all the way to 2023, that we will see the pandemic and its effect probably lasting till 2023. And we have to plan both in terms of prevention and treatment, as well as economic recovery, special measures, all the way to 2023. I am afraid that I have been very, very right in my somewhat pessimistic but realistic forecast. At the same time, I have written profusely, sometimes jointly with Professor Muhammad Yunus, Nobel Peace Prize, 2006, on the vaccine as a common good for humanity, whereby all of us, understanding that COVID is a global pandemic and that we are a global family of poor and rich, that we must not profit from the suffering of everyone. And therefore, the discovery of vaccines should be made available to all for free. That would have been the greatest, the best test of our humanity. It has not been the case so far. Pharmaceutical industries that have received billions of dollars in capital injection from the major powers, particularly the European Union, the United States, have profited enormously. Pfizer, for instance, accumulated $30 billion in a single year in profit. And the list of what I would say inhumanity goes on. We see that in spite of the numerous appeals by people like me, by my friend Kailash Satyarthi, Nobel Peace Prize 2014 of India, on child poverty, on child slavery, on poverty around the world that increased with the pandemic, we have appealed to a greater attention to child well-being and to the well-being of the people on the periphery of the world. And I have appealed to banks to write off the debts of the most indebted countries, of the fragile states, the least developed countries, and so on. Next to nothing has been done in that regard. So it is hypocritical to talk about the human family. And it doesn't seem like we are learning anything. What the world order? Well, I don't know. With the current global leadership as it is, what kind of a world order we are going to see? Right now, there is no global leadership. There is not a single leader of any major power that has been able to project, influence, shape the mind, the thinking, the policies of our global community on showing greater solidarity, humanity in fighting COVID, but also in stopping the economic, social degradation of countries around the world.
That seems a very good point at which I can invite you, Professor Fujisaki, to offer a view to this first question.
Thank you very much. I would like to echo much of what President Ramos-Horta said. I think what we have seen is that weak people, poorer people suffered more in the world. That's internationally as well as in one country. That's the real problem. And internationally, as UN has announced, 6.3 billion doses of vaccination has been done. But 73% of people that has been vaccinated are in only 10 countries. In Africa, only 3% of the people have been vaccinated. That is not only fair, but that will not eliminate this virus. That's point one. What do we have to do internationally? I think we have seen surprisingly weak leadership of WHO, COVAX. We have to fortify that, review that. That's internationally. Internally, surprisingly, all the leaders are saying same thing now, similar thing. President Biden said there's no trickle down in the economy, trickle down that someone has gone first and others can follow. That doesn't happen. President Xi Jinping is saying wealth distribution. Prime Minister Kishida, the new Prime Minister of Japan, is saying we should not only talk about growth, we have to talk about redistribution. Everyone is now concerned that this weaker part in the country is suffering. For that, I think we have to relook at taxation, progressive tax, inheritance tax in all the countries, and also universal health care, education. Those elements are more important. That's what the principles or whatever that COVID-19 has told us to focus on, and I think we have to work together to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Anand, and it's great to be in this great event, and I think both previous speakers said very well. I think that actually today we're getting the 2021, and now it's also the 76 years since we established UN system and global governance. But I think when 1945, when UN was established, the world population was 2.5 billion. Now it's 7.7 or 7.8 billion already. So the world has grown largely, out of the structure that we have first envisioned and first, architected. So now it's time that we actually have to work together. I agree with other speaker that there's a lacking of a global leadership. I think largely due to the imbalance of the trust and the deficit of the trust, and also we have to really work very, very hard to solve that. So for this COVID-19, for example, I mean, now we have such a disparity between rich country, developed country, and developing countries, and I think that that's where exactly where leadership is needed. For example, I think that we had just COP26 concluded in Glasgow, and UN, and of course also China and the US issued a joint statement, cutting the emissions and the carbon like that. So I'm thinking, why not we call a global summit of fighting pandemic? Let's get UN, WHO, and all the big countries, US, China, EU, Japan, and many others, so we can really find the solution as to what are the vaccine production, how that distribute to developing countries. For example, right now China has donated almost 2 billion vaccine to developing countries. US has donated 1 billion, and then Chinese president has promised to donate $4 billion US, and US President Biden said at the G7 that US is going to donate 2 billion. So that's a great, that kind of competition is good. I mean, we are, let's do that for the developing countries. But I think we need a really coordinated approach, and we're at WHO and China, US, and the EU probably should work together. For example, how are we going to distribute this vaccine? Should we really let go these patents, and so we set up more manufacturing for the developing countries? Like China has set up a vaccine manufacturing center in Egypt. So things like that, we need to really have international coordination on that. So I really call for a global summit, a vaccine summit, or a pandemic fighting summit, so that we really be prepared for the post, or even live with long term with this COVID, how we can deal with that, the strategy. For example, the vaccine passport, the technology that we harnessed during each country, how to contain digitally the virus, and all those things should be shared and transferred to the developing countries. And also, I think that we maybe should have all those vaccine manufacturers get together, have a summit, and as far as how the technology transfer can be done to the developing countries. So I think there's many things we can do. Let's call a COP20 something, for the vaccine, for the COVID-19, and let's get UN and the WHO and everybody work on that. So I think in that, if that pays that kind of attention, we can only assure that the mobility, the trade, the economic activity, the recession can be prevented, and only through the strong global leadership. And that's really a great thing to do. So for the last 75 years, the UN system has protected us from Third World War, but the UN system didn't provide us from the world virus war. So we're having the world virus war going on. We should really take all the great efforts and really work together. And that's really for the human community, the safety and the health condition are out of the most important, and geopolitics should give way for the priority of the human lives. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Your approaches to answering question one have focused on leadership and on institutions. As more than one of you has identified, the institutions that we know, the United Nations, the WHO, etc., have been in operation since 1945. And we need to ask a question, which I will now put. Are they adequate today? and what conditions and factors point to change being necessary? And maybe the easiest way to deal with this would be to ask you first, Dr. Wang, then you, Professor Fujisaki, and then you, President. What conditions and factors need to change about our institutions that are presently there to deal with this?
Yeah, thank you, Arnold. I think that really what I think now is that the international governance system, be it at the UN or at World Bank, IMF, or WHO, I think that it was really largely designed by the developed countries in the past. So we need to reflect the new element of BRICS countries, the rising economy, and the developing countries as well. So I think that is where probably we should have more cause for more coordination among those countries. But I think G20 should really play a pivotal role for that. I think G20 should just not be held once a year, but maybe now this year is the Indonesia will be the next chair of G20. So it'd be great to really start organize sectorial summit, like ministerial summit on fighting, G20 ministerial of health summit to fighting the COVID. So I think this is really, but also let's get all the immigration ministers together. As to how we can facilitate the global travel, how many quarantine we needed, how many quarantine we need when we come back, what are the safest practice, what's the minimum cost, what's the optimal balance between we maintain the COVID at the minimum risk, but also we maximize the mobility of the people. So there's a lot of experience can be learned from each other. So I think that is where we are lacking right now. And also the world there's no coordination on that. That's really unfortunate. The US is backing off WTO, WHO, many things. The world is really the leadership is in the vacuum, and I think that's where I'm glad that US wants to coming back to the multilateralism. But let's do more. Let's get China, Japan, Australia, Canada, all those European countries to work together. So I think that things can be done like that, but also let's strengthen those regional organizations like RCEP, which is already in fact. And RCEP can also maybe taking some initiative. Why not call ministerial meeting on how we can prevent the regional prevention of COVID. So as many things can be done. Yes.
Professor Fujisaki.
I would like to support what Professor Wang said about vaccine summit, governmental or private, and I think these are very important. Just one thing to add, if we are going to have these institutions or WHO meetings, it should be out of political concern. It should be really medical, and let's not bring in political concerns here. Second, I think WHO, they have worked, but everyone knows that they have sent wrong messages at the wrong time. And I think we have to review what they have said. And I think we need to relook at the leadership. I have nothing against an individual who is from a developing country, but still, I think we have to really clearly review the leadership and bring in some new blood there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. President José Ramos-Horta.
Well, if I were to voice an opinion, I would say the Secretary General of the United Nations should obviously work behind the scenes to start with the G7 countries, the G20, and the other countries to try to convene a meeting, an international conference, not only of member states and multilateral banks, financial institutions, but also with the private sector, the big economic conglomerates of the world. Because today there is much more liquidity is accumulated by foundations, corporations, individual families around the world than governments that are constrained by many different reasons, as we know. There are every year there are trillions and trillions of dollars of increase in global wealth, and these trillions of dollars.
Can I be excused a moment, President, because I'm being pressured to move on. There is one more question before we open up to the people that have asked, and that seems a natural point to break into what you have what you've added. Can I pick up three specific things? First, with you, Professor Fujisaki. You've mentioned Prime Minister Fumio Kishida prioritizing the redistribution of wealth, and you've also said about President Xi Jinping pursuing prosperity. You may have ideas on the workability of these things.
I think it works different in each country because our systems are different. For example, we have universal health care and we have inheritance tax system. Some countries, they don't have. And I think but what I'm saying is that everyone thinks that present level is not sufficient and discrepancy is widening. And there are frustrations, so we have to relook at it. Before I would leave, may I make one suggestion? That is that this group should make a proposal that Dr. Katalin Karikó, an Hungarian who invented messenger RNA, should be given a same level of prize as President Ramos-Horta, Nobel Prize. She received a Lasker Prize this year, but I think really she should be honored, would deserve that. I'm sorry, thank you very much.
Thank you. I want then to ask you, Dr. Wang, to explain to you about the relevance in today's world in light of the pandemic crisis of non-intervention or non-interference in guiding relations between nations. Is that tenable?
Yeah, I think that no interference in the right way, I think is still preferred because, however, I think one thing we need to really look at is that the world is getting more colorful and more multifaceted and more multipolar now. For example, I mean, when President Biden, when he withdrew from Afghanistan, he said, okay, from now on, the U.S. will no longer seek nation building anymore, which means, impose a model to Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or Libya will not be the case in the future. I'm glad to see President Xi and President Biden talked, and President Biden said U.S. is not seeking to change China, and also not to seek to get an alliance against China. So that kind of interference, I think, is not necessary. However, we should call for coordination. We should call for international countries like fighting pandemic. We should strengthen the UN system. We should really strengthen WHO, WTO, RCEP, CPTPP, and all those regional organizations, so that we can really still have some kind of a rule, UN type of rule-based system, so that everybody has to bid by. And if you do not, we can of course talk to each other on that. That does mean you are interfering to each other. But what I'm saying is that, like issue like Taiwan, I mean, that should not be interfering. That's a China domestic issue. So things like that, like Afghanistan or Middle East, I think each country should really allow its own system to develop. We should not recognize there's not only just one system in the world. There could be many systems. Let's compare the bottom line and the KPI. So if KPI is good, like China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty, that should give credit. That should not be intervened.
To that litany, I can add, as a proud New Zealander, the fact that APEC has just concluded has been chaired by New Zealand, in which many of these things of which you've addressed were advanced by the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
APEC was the invention of the idea came from New Zealand.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
itself.
I mean, now it has ADEPA and the CPTPP now and RCEP. I mean, New Zealand made a lot of contributions. Yes.
Lastly, it's question 3C. Can I put to you for a brief answer, President Ramos-Horta? Do the present international norms provide adequate protection for the individual person, especially for their human rights? And is there a case for protection of human dignity?
Well, I would say the current international architecture, whether the United Nations or any of the major international organizations, no matter how much we wish to envisage, design, change in terms of the institution, the organization of it, well, as long as we have the selfish national interest prevailing as the guiding principle, foundation of states, well, not much is going to change. Change will come about only when millions of people around the world in key cities, key countries protest, demand justice, demand end of extreme poverty, end of wars, because look, you know, every time there is a financial crisis, economic crisis in the world, the profit of the weapons industries goes up. These people never suffer. We look at the war in Yemen, in Syria, Afghanistan, etc., fueled by our merchants, but also by governments. And when there is a financial economic crisis, well, the common people suffer, but not the CEOs of these major banks are the ones that suffer. And they are the ones who often, through their imprudence. So my problem is, we can imagine a different international architecture, as creative as we wish, but in the end, we cannot change the nation states and those that are in charge. We cannot change Putin, we cannot change Xi Jinping, we cannot change Biden, and so on and so on.
You expressed the challenge very well, if I may say so. It's time for us to move to the next phase, where questions have come in and been lodged. And I can put question 1, which comes from Jamila in Indonesia, to you now, and you can choose which one of you might like to pick it up. How would the global leadership in healing the world from the pandemic affect world power dynamics later, post-COVID? Is there any one of you that would like to pick that challenge up?
Well, maybe I could give a try. I think that right now is really a time to show the sincerity and the capacity to do it the best. So China actually has vaccinated its population for 2.3 billion doses already, but China has almost donated 2 billion vaccine to the world. So China has been performing relatively responsibly well. And China has pledged in supporting the developing countries through WHO and many other South country mechanism, 2 billion at one time, US dollar. Another announcement by President is 2 billion another time, where President Biden, I think, announced 2 billion as well. I think, you know, if China is actively pursue that and supporting the developing countries, showing more responsibility, China is already the second largest donor to the United Nations, largest peace-sending country from permanent member countries. So I think in the future, you know, we're not saying that China is going to take a lead, but at least we should give more room for China to get involved in those international issues, in IMF, WHO, WTO, or any other matter. Maybe, you know, so I think, you know, so after COVID, I mean, China has 1.4 billion people, 500 million middle class. I think we should give a rightful recognition and places for room for China to support, play more stakeholder role for our planet, for the humankind in the future.
Thank you. I know that you want to say something, Professor Fujisaki.
I totally agree with Professor Wang that China should get more merit because of its contribution. I feel a little sorry that China didn't get it because of its diplomacy. And I think in the future, they will improve how to address those issues and the world recognition will change. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll move to question 2. Do you think the post-pandemic world can be a momentum to fix the global misdirection and failures all this time? This question is from Alex of Russia. President Ramos-Horta, can you perhaps provide an answer to that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sorry. Do you think the post-pandemic world can be a momentum to fix the global misdirection and failures all this time?
Well, if the Secretary General of the UN were to convene anytime in the next few months, a joint meeting of the G7, G20, other major powers, but also inviting scientists, inviting corporations, big foundations, major universities of the world, etc., to first time bring together a summit of all these people, not only politicians, not only heads of states, but the heads of the major corporations, scientists, to try to look at a post-COVID order in the sense of a post-COVID order that is founded more on humanity, more on people-centered, how we can, out of this nightmare, as we wake up from this nightmare, we extract some of the best lessons of this nightmare, and that is, it is possible. Scientists have, in short period of time, discovered vaccines, some more effective than others. They are discovering therapeutics. So it shows that there is enough brain power in the world and enough capacity to develop preventive medical strategies and the cures. At the same time, if we can do that, let's have a new roadmap, a new Marshall Plan, adapted for current situation, led by, that is a challenge to United States, to China. These two global powers, with others, lead a new Marshall Plan for the rest of the world to address extreme poverty, environment, clean water for communities, sanitation for communities, better education for the more impoverished countries. And that is doable. It requires only imagination on the part of the Secretary General to really push hard for such a summit.
Thank you.
Maybe I could add I think it's probably time is right. We had a Second World War finished. We gave birth to the United Nations system. Now the first world virus war, if it's concluded, we should give us some new artifact, new infrastructure to the global governance. So I think that maybe China, EU, US can work, some new organizations like International Health Organization, the Carbon Organization. But I think a new Marshall Plan is possible, where I think China's BRI can work with B3W, and then all infrastructure related. President Biden just signed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and China already done that for 8 years on the infrastructure. So maybe the infrastructure would be the next biggest attraction for keeping the peace and the prosperity for the next half a century. If China and the US can work together on B3W and BRI, and we should really let that two work together for most of the countries and developing countries.
Thank you.
One thing just to add is that the difference with SDGs of the UN and the one before, MDG, is that they added human security element, and MDG plus human security is the SDG. Human security means health and safety, security of individuals. So we have already set up that framework. So it's maybe, I agree that we should get together and meet and discuss, but rather than really starting to look at something new, maybe we can put in money and try to do it through the present infrastructure we have as well. So because it's so urgent, and we should really use everything we have. And that's just my observation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. From a moderator's point of view, all three of you making your comments have foreshadowed question 3, which is the last one that we'll have time to put forward to you. It's come from Russia from a person named Stephen, and he talks about the term new normal, which underlines a bit what you have been speaking of. And he asks as follows: perhaps the term new normal should be redefined and brought into an international level. What should be, he asks, the new norms implemented for the world order? We've heard already the suggestion that it should be more than politicians. It should be professionals and other people in addition to politicians and government leaders. But I'd like to ask all three of you to speak briefly as to this, and we will be required to finish in about 6 minutes' time. So if you can each be generous enough to spend 2 minutes or so, that will be enable us to keep to time suitably. Can we start with yourself, President Ramos-Horta?
What is the new normal?
Yeah, what is the new, if we have a new normal, what should be the new norms for the new normal?
Well, I only can imagine, anticipate the new normal for the next 2-3 years, and that is a very different world from what we saw a few years ago, only 2-3 years ago, in that continuing to be extraordinarily difficult for people's movement, for physical contact, for holding face-to-face meetings across the globe, and continuing the new normal continue to be probably enormous cost of exports of goods, or shipping, aircraft, transportation, both passengers and cargo. So I don't see any major improvement in the lives of the people in what we might declare, the new normal, whenever that's supposed to happen.
Thank you. Dr. Wang.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the new normal will emerge because after all, we have gone through this catastrophe of pandemic fighting 2-3 years, in a row. I think the new normal will be that we have a better understanding of each other because we can't be isolated. We'll have to recognize there's more than one system in the world. We need a multipolar world, and also we need to give more recognition to the countries like China, Japan, Russian, and all the regional countries as well. So I think there's a lot of new normal to be added on. But also another new normal would be the digital economy will be really strong, and we need a new international organization to taking care of that. And also sustainable, we have a new awareness of the climate change that is also is shaping all of us now. And finally, I think infrastructure, infrastructure revolution, given the China experience, China's total length of speed railway is already 2/3 of the world, is equal to the next 10 countries combined, where US military budget is equal to the next 10 countries combined. We should change that. We should let infrastructure revolution, transformation, lead the world into a big prosperity. That should become a new normal. And of course, again, finally, the COVID-19, we should have a very strong World Organization of Health, or that kind of system, and have alert system, preventing system, implementing system, and that should be really become so important to prevent future catastrophe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. Professor Fujisaki.
Thank you very much. When we talk about new normal, we should not exaggerate it, because most of the people in the world really like to see what we already have continue. Freedom, democracy, human rights, these things are important. And however, in the present system, we have just seen that there are new challenges we have to meet. That's COVID-19, climate change, and discrepancy of wealth. So we have to address those. That's the new normal side, but we have to keep the normal side as well. But I really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you very much for inviting me as well. Kia ora, Mr. Chairman.
Can I then take up the reins to bring our session to an end by doing 2 or 3 things. First of all, to thank you all for conveying your experience of international relations and the issues that are present for countries and people to think about. If I may say so, I think you have made sterling contributions in that regard. I think all of us who have listened to you have been able to pick up gems of items that need reconsideration. For example, our institutions, the leadership involved in those institutions, new institutions to do, for example, as Dr. Wang said, with infrastructure, a summit to do with vaccines, the 2 items proceeding side by side, related to prevention on the one hand and related to economic recovery on the other. They are both items that in the post-COVID world need equal intensity in dealing with the future. I thank you all for your sterling contributions, and I now bring our session to an end and return us to those people in the top left-hand corners of our screen who will now proceed to advance us to the next session. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you.